this is with regard, and just for everybody, if you have, this is called the Apostolic Ideal in St. Dominic, and the outline and the reading is online at dominicanidaho.org. So if you want to bring it up, and it's under formation, and where you get with that is, you go to formation tab, and you go down to formation program dash Father Bart de la Torre, OP. And in that, under his program is a reading called, not far down from the top, actually the second reading from the top, it's called Apostolic Ideal of Early Dominicans. And the third reading is 1.3.2, which is study outline of Apostolic Ideal of the Early Dominicans. Right here. So it's, again, to repeat, dominicanidaho.org, formation tab. Go to the on the right is a list of litany of formation programs, and the one to tap on is formation program Father Bart de la Torre, OP. And when it pops up, it'll be the third reading from the top, looking at the outline. I'm using the outline.
Okay, I finally got into full.
It's already on my phone.
Formation. I'm sorry,
I must have
John.
looked at it before.
Slow here.
And there it is right there. We have it on the screen.
So you go to the formation tab.
Go to the formation tab.
You gotta click the formation header, and then you scroll down to the formation program Father Bart
de la Torre, OP.
de la Torre, yeah.
And then the third reading, for this, the second and third are the subject matter of this. The second one is the full reading. The third one is the outline, which is I'm going to be working on with today.
And did you get there? Good.
Yeah. What is an ideal? Anybody online or anyone in the room? What is an ideal?
Perfect idea.
A
Yeah.
blueprint.
Well, what is mankind capable of doing? What separates him among other characteristics from the animal kingdom?
Capacity to be abstraction, right?
Yeah, but it's that abstraction he is able, to some extent, animals have, they have to think to a certain extent, although it's very obviously limited. But the abstraction that the human understands is the conception of understanding what is perfect. We can imagine the perfect triangle, the perfect square, the perfect building, the perfect church design, but implementing is a difficult thing. So, but it's a standard of perfection or excellence, a person or thing conceived as embodying such a conception, and it's a model for imitation. So I think this kind of takes us where we want to go with this, the model for imitation. And a person, it's an ideal. Christ calls us to live the perfect life, like God the Father, and there causes some of the goods that we have is in this world is to get to know things better, through education and exercise of the virtues. Education assists. I mean, that's what Dominicans do, is to study, regardless of of our own personal background. We can take the time to study and get to know things better. And for the saints, particularly Saint Dominic and his followers, is the apostolic missions that they went on. That was a school of perfection, and our dedication to preaching, obviously, in preaching in the way that is ideal in the situation you're caught up in. I mean, for me in my situation, for example, practice of law is to try to be very clear about what's right and wrong, and to exercise preaching to the extent that I can that someone's going to listen in my industry.
And the requirement, the need for law.
The need for law, yeah. But Saint Dominic was able, because That was his entire focus. Under almost any circumstance he was caught up in, he could preach. But if you look at when he spent that night with the innkeeper to convert him, to bring him back to the faith, he spent all night talking to him. So he wasn't on a podium preaching in the classical sense, but in the sense of drawing him back to the truth. And that's what we look at. It's particularly important for the third order, because we can do the same thing in the fellowship with others, in our friendship, and with where we are in life and where we're headed, as we can do that. So we mentioned Christ. Our Lord Jesus Christ was obviously the foundation of all this in the apostolic ideal. It's kind of interesting because he calls us to be as perfect as the Father. And I remember him asking, or the apostles asking, what must they do? He said, you must love the Lord your God with all your mind, your soul, body, everything. I mean, so how do we, it's through that venue that we get to perfection. So the ideal, I would think, has something to do in this life, and what we can imagine is living and loving God the Father perfectly. That's the ideal. And Phil?
Be willing to consider different views. The willingness. You have the ability to consider, but willingness to do so as Christ would have done.
And why would we want to listen to different views? Anybody?
Because you have different viewpoints, different opinions.
Right. I think sometimes other people speak the truth that you haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
So your mind goes, whoop, okay, truth there, and then we listen to each other. Good point, Phil.
You connect with
Yeah.
people, and then you can have more influence.
Yeah.
If you reach some common ground.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when your desires to know the truth, and you are fellowship with another person, and he or she is seeking the truth by, in Proverbs, I think it's Proverbs 24, maybe 16 or 24. It says that man sharpens iron, or by consulting with another man, he sharpens his iron. What he's talking about, you get to know each other better when you consult and hold each other accountable. Your counsel to one another can make you better understand things. How many times have you been around people, they say something, and you're going, wow, I never heard that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why listening to others, that's such a good point, is so important.
Well, it helps you delve into it more too, and
Right,
learn
right.
more.
One thing in my business, the state bar deplores solo practitioners because they don't have an echo chamber. And that's just the professional reflection upon, well, it's the same with anyone, any business. Like when I was a teenager, I could barely hammer a nail. And my best friend said, John, my grandmother hammers a nail better than you do. And of course, he showed me how to do it correctly.
Okay.
So, just being willing to listen and to share. And he spoke a certain truth. I mean, I couldn't.
I couldn't never.
I was a
That's
complete
funny.
dork with that. Anyway, did you say?
I was just thinking that that's so true, is listening, being
Right.
where you, instead of having a closed mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another road we could go down, but the synodal thing. Is the question what's behind it. I don't want to go too deep into that because I do want to cover this, but the question that's always in my mind behind that, because it's so unruly in a sense, it's not guided well, is like, who's listening and who's speaking if everybody's listening? And are they listening for the truth or just another point of view? No one says anything about the truth.
Well, we're the one true church. We have the entire gamut of everything we need. However, they have portions or kernels of truth, these other folks, that are not, as blessed as we are to be the one true church. So yeah, they have
We have the
kernels
Mass
of
and
it.
the sacraments, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you want. That's why dialogue is important if you're seeking the truth. If you're just yakking to yak, it probably is not the best.
So
No.
Or
advantage.
get your opinion across.
Right.
Yeah.
This is
I'm still hearing it's like there's sort of two tracks here. One is you may have a piece of truth that I haven't heard before and I need to hear. Or on the other track is I need to listen to you, even if you're the innkeeper who's going off to the Albigensian thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I don't listen to you, there's no way I can understand you and help to convert you.
That's a good point.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
I mean, I think that's what I heard Teresa
That's the
say.
connection
right,
you
right,
have
right.
to make so that they're willing to open
Right.
their
Mhm,
mind
mhm.
to what you have to contribute.
Right. So if you're not willing to
Yeah.
listen to me, then
Yeah.
why should I listen to you?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's
it's got to be
interesting.
reciprocal.
I think what's fulfilled in that is stated in 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter says to be ready for ready defense of the faith, but to do so with kindness and reverence. So that prevents people from going into a church and drumming, listen to me because I'm going to tell you the truth. Well, you have to have a relationship first. I think.
Yes.
At least we don't have the authority to preach like a priest does, thankfully, and people listen. So Jesus is the founder of our faith and the foundation of the apostolic ideal, and it's the apostolic ideal, and this calls us to perfection. He's teaching us, and he says that the apostles get to know the faith through the proverbs that they're taught, and through the graduation of time, things start to fall and to make sense, and they finally realize he's going to die on the cross. Hey,
Sorry I'm late.
you're not late. You're fine. Come on in.
Thank you.
Come on.
John,
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
nice to meet you.
Marie,
Marie, nice to meet you. Yeah, just pull up
I'm
there.
getting ready to go on pilgrimage with the Dominicans.
Oh, cool. Where at? Over to Europe?
Yeah, to
Wonderful.
Mary Magdalene's caves.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got four weeks
In Provence?
in Provence in the Swiss Alps. I mean the French Alps.
Yeah.
And Italy and Rome and the whole 9 yards.
Oh,
I fly to Florence on Divine Mercy Sunday.
that's wonderful.
We have to
Wow.
come back and tell us about your trip.
I will,
That sounds
of course.
wonderful.
Pictures too.
I would, yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
A lot of pictures.
Excuse me.
Oh,
I have a blog that,
Oh.
that I'll just connect with you.
Oh,
I was
great.
taught. I was taught by the Dominicans actually, in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, cool.
Don't hold it against me.
Oh, I won't. Bunch of good people, in fact.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, the apostolic ideal is what is the kind of the vision that's given to us, going out and preaching perfectly, but we have to know the truth. So that comes with a process: study, experience, reading the scriptures, adhering to the tradition of the Dominican order, and following through. And following through helps us to. We'll never achieve the ideal, but we will walk the road towards ideal if we are willing to learn that.
I think that perfection in the Christian life is equivalent to charity. That is, the more charity, the more perfect you are. The apostolic ideal is not exactly perfection in the Christian life. It's more specific. It has to do with preaching,
Yeah,
and the bishops are the original preachers, and then the priests under them. But with St. Dominic, the church founded an order of preachers, but the order of preachers itself has parts. So the second and third orders didn't go out and preach,
no, that's what I'm saying.
and
But they did so within the realm of their influence.
well, yeah, everyone does that. But,
Not everyone.
well, I mean, in your family, whoever you're around, right, your friends and family,
Well,
your actions and your words will be.
It's not just that. It's like and that's the whole meaning of the third order is to, not the whole meaning, obviously, to follow Christ in his fullness, but the reality is that as we learn things better and as we get to improve our knowledge and live in accordance with the rule, and we improve, then we become more effective in those places where you're talking about the family, work,
Right.
in the environment we live, in the marketplace
I was
of
just
ideas.
distinguishing that from preaching.
Oh yeah.
So, like for example, the cloistered Dominican nuns who do a perpetual rosary in Fatima before the Blessed Sacrament, they're not preaching, but they are obtaining the graces for the preachers to.
They're being Franciscan.
Well,
They're
being
preaching
Dominican.
always, and when they have to, they use words.
Yeah, but they're cloistered, right? So, like Poor Clares. Not all Dominican nuns are cloistered. There are Dominican sisters that do have active works like
So that's
teaching and
A role to play within the
order of preachers.
Yeah.
And the third order traditionally was a penitential order to just to help obtain the graces, so that when the preachers preached, people would be converted, because without grace, the best preaching in the world won't convert anybody. You need the grace to move the person from the inside as well as the preaching from the outside.
Everything that you're mentioning is true. And everything that you're mentioning, this side of the pulpit applies to us as well. In the sense that we can engage in preaching in a style and method by which is not necessarily recognized as preaching. You know, when somebody asks you a question with regard to the faith, the answer is a form of preaching. And that's what St. Peter says. He wasn't talking to the apostles necessarily in 1 Peter, where he says to be ready with your faith to talk to others in reverence and kindness. So what I'm saying is totally with you on the priestly function, because it's an office we cannot do.
Yeah,
but they're
and
also
I guess I would
within,
distinguish preaching from evangelization, right? So preaching
But
is
the problem
one way
is
of
that
evangelizing, but there's other ways of evangelizing. For example, the Legion of Mary, they go out 2 by 2. Their favorite work. They also do other things, but their favorite work is go out 2 by 2 and go door to door. And that isn't really preaching, but that's more evangelizing.
Well, it's kind of one and the same.
Well, no, preaching is a more of a public event, whereas preaching happens. Where does it happen? It happens in church at every mass when the priest preaches. That's official preaching of the church. The priest is doing so in the name of the bishop, right? Because it's through the bishop the preaching happens. But
but what is it that separates it from? What is it that function separates from the private evangelization, as you say? The priest says one thing. Our reflections should say the same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
There's not a difference in the truth. It's just that.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, one is limited to a function of on the altar.
Well, I mean,
the other one is limited.
There
unlimited
is
ones.
preach. There are like Vincent Ferry. He went out and preached.
No, I'm with you, but the thing is that this.
So it doesn't have to be in the church,
But I think it may be a distinction without a difference in certain aspects when applied to the third order or to Christians in general, because no one's going to stand in front of the lunch counter at the local cafeteria and start preaching.
When you knock on the door, evangelizing that way, there is going to be a a dialogue, right? Whereas in preaching, there's not normally a dialogue. There can be sometimes, but it's usually brief. Like somebody yells out of the crowd something, and Jesus answers it, right? but generally speaking, the preaching is more like a lecture where people are listening, not so much.
That's a teacher.
It's more like
you because
I like it. You're playing devil's advocate. You're pushing him.
Well,
to expand his thinking.
Well,
Really.
and Max is very bright, obviously, and
Clearly.
I'm just trying to, because this is a lesson that was handed to us by the priests, the friars, to learn. And so what I'm trying to do, so your distinctions are valid. The problem is these analyses apply to us to the extent that they do. It's something that if you're a priest, you're fully taken evangelical counsels and all that. But when it comes to living a third order life, or if lay people in this, what part of it do we adopt? Are we completely take the vow of poverty? No, but we can live in a way that is reflective of the friar's poverty by not buying too much, not depending on goods, and living a life that's more simple.
Where St. Catherine says, through God the Father, charity requires the living of the evangelical counsels, at least in
Okay.
spirit.
Okay.
Well,
then you may just
the
make my
longer
point.
article by Eugene Caccia actually just sort of distinguishes Dominicans from Benedictines, having grown out of the tradition of the Desert Fathers, where the way to pursue the Christian life is, as Jesus went out into the desert after his baptism, so the Desert Fathers went out into the desert and lived like eremitical hermit life. And not only the Benedictines, but the Cistercians and the Carthusians did the same sort of thing. The Dominicans and the Franciscans distinguished from that hermit life to become the apostolic life, which is both, which is sort of a mixture of contemplative and active. That so the apostles, they did go to the upper room and pray, and then they also went out and preached, right? So it's sort of a mixed. This ideal here is one of a combination of contemplative and active life.
And it traces itself in the case of Dominic to St. Augustine, because he found the canons, what we now call the canons regular, for the priests.
Yeah.
That was a rule of life for priests. And that was looking back to what Jesus did with his apostles and disciples, how he sent them out 2 by 2, and also how in the Acts of the Apostles, the early community lived really a religious life, right?
And I think with your mentioning the Acts, and then Michael with regard to the later Desert Fathers, and then the later ones with Benedict in the 500s, was the world they lived in. And this outline talks about the world they lived in, and it describes, quote, all sorts of upheavals faced the church, and even heresies following the wake of the movement, close quote. That being that the condition of the world at the time of Benedict, they raced out of Rome to go establish a monastery. At the time of Saint Anthony, he lived in the desert, contra to the world in a different way. The same with the Acts of the Apostles. They preached because the world was different. And at the time of Saint Dominic, it took an apostolic life and a contemplative and active life to go deal with what was going on in the world. So the world was presenting a problem, and the apostolic life, as instructed through St. Dominic, was presented. Now, with the modern era, the lay people have been asked to get involved in the world, and part of this, this is where we are, especially with in the world, when a king retrenches, something fills it. So what we're seeing is the structure of the church. I don't like it, but it is abandoning some of its authority. Abandoning is too light a word. They no longer instruct people on moral life. They tell us all about politics, and that's a shift in direction. It's a funny thing, but the thing is that more importantly than ever, that we're called to live a life. We were called 2,000 years ago to live this life, but now it's become particularly important because of the retrenchment of some of the authorities in the church that are unwilling to do stuff. I'll give you an example. Father, what's his name, over at St. Mark's?
John Mosher?
The other guy.
Father Paul.
Yeah, Father Paul. I love Father Paul. He stood up just prior to the election, and he said, you cannot vote for somebody that's not pro-life. And he didn't just stay on the subject. He talked about a lot of different stuff, but he went back to it 3 times. What happened during Mass is people got up and left. I respect them because they don't believe it. And I don't care. you know, I mean, they make that choice, but afterwards, some guy went up and attacked him.
Physically
Like,
attacked him?
physically
No.
or-
Verbally.
Verbally. And it's like,
Oh my gosh.
you know,
During the mass. or
So he just
right
After
afterwards.
Mass.
Yeah, so he said you were wrong in your homily. This is why.
You have no right. I don't know. The argument was such that you have no right to do this. And the thing is this is his very purpose. This is his very purpose.
The teachers, yes.
To teach and to preach.
Yeah, so it's a failure
So-
of people to do that that causes that situation where people are expecting not to be
But-
preached to.
If the thing is that Father Paul didn't deserve that at all, because he was doing the very function of what he's there for, in addition to the sacramental nature of his office. So that said,
But it brings out the corruption, right? So
no.
that person can
My
be
point gets
healed.
back to the retrenchment, because these are just men living in this office, and they pull back when you've got the boldness of the world coming after them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our place not to replace them, but to live in accordance with the call of holiness of Christ. He calls us to holiness. It's not just the modern age, not just Vatican II. The call to holiness is when Christ says, I expect you to be perfect as the Father is perfect. Well, how do we get there? And I think part of the answer here is this
Apostolic ideal.
apostolic ideal, is to try to achieve it through the practice of virtue and the faith.
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to say was the apostolic ideal has parts, and not everybody fulfills all the parts.
Right.
And
I
that's
have
why
no problem with that.
That's why I was talking about it. If you look in the Acts of the Apostles, right, and also in the Gospels, you have these people that support the apostles and support Jesus, women and some men.
The deacons are
Well,
doing
No,
they're
there's
along-
that
along
too,
the
but
apostles that
there's
preach.
that too, but there's also, for instance, there's Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, right? Jesus' friends, they would support him, and this goes back. This has been throughout all time, because if you look at Elisha
Sorry.
and
you,
Elijah,
Marie.
they
I have to
both.
go to direction.
Oh,
Have fun.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
both Elijah and Elisha, they both had what we would call lay people that supported them. One of them, for Elisha, had a room built for him in their house.
No,
And so anyway, this is participating in the apostolic life.
but what you're identifying is the Dominicans. They have an aspect in the apostolic life to live. And
Yes.
it's like that. You're giving a great example of my point.
Yeah, I'm
Is
not
the-
disagreeing
the
with you. I was
different-
just trying to distinguish.
I know, but
So often people talk about the third order like somehow it's different than it was. That now we preach and before we did
I
penance
know,
or something.
I know we don't. But not in any sense of that.
So
But wait. Let me back off that statement. What we do today is what we were supposed to do 800 years ago.
yes,
Okay? Is to talk, visit, be with people in fellowship, and live in accordance with a certain life.
you've seen St. Catherine of Siena, right? She had a circle of people around her. For instance, they got together every day and prayed vespers.
Okay, well we're talking the same thing. The thing is that the third order is not, and I do agree there's people that are pushed that we should go out and preach just like a preacher, just like the priest. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And
That's not what this is.
that's
saying.
not what this is about. I'm with you.
Yeah, I
But-
just wanted to say the apostolic ideal, it has parts. And the chief part is going out 2 by 2 and preaching.
Well, let's study the parts.
But
Let's get
there's the
through.
supporting parts. Just like Jesus had people who supported him in his ministry while he was alive.
Particularly the women that helped
Right.
back, and this is also true with the deacons at the time of the
Yeah,
apostolic.
although they're
Acts.
closer to the preaching because
Yeah.
it belongs.
Okay.
A deacon is an ordinary preacher, so a deacon can preach.
Okay, one of the
Like a
parts
priest.
that you're talking about, the evangelical councils, deals with poverty. And there's two elements. One's preaching inclusive of the authority to preach and in poverty. So do we live in poverty as a pastor? No. Or as a priest? No. But it is a function that we can live in our hearts and minds and how we deal with life. And it says here, due to their small number, they were a large Christian family that shared all the belongings that they possess in common. This is the time of the apostolic life, the book of Acts. And it was life of the primitive church attracted to all ages, even today, of the simplicity of life. St. Augustine introduced the apostolic life to priests. And during the time of St. Dominic, quote, the apostolic ideal attracted people due to all sorts of upheavals facing the church and even heresies following in the wake of the movement, close quote. It's important to note that is the time of St. Dominic, and the heresies we deal with today is one that I might ask is, if we live in holiness or try to achieve that holiness, perfection through the practice of virtues and to talk to people about the faith in a, quote, non-preaching manner, or in a preaching manner that in the sense applies to us, are we dealing with the upheavals of today? And I think the answer is yes, because we become somewhat of a light to the world, only to the extent that Christ is with us, obviously. And as you noted, the mission of the apostles was particular to the bishops. And the right to preach belongs to that office, and it's granted to others. And the ordinary preaching often failed to grasp the apostolic ideal due to the negligence and the difficulties of life. And part of that is, and the same excuse today, I mean, the bishops today are abandoning that function and office of the bishop in some bizarre way. Maybe not all of them, but a certain degree of them are.
It's rare to hear a bishop preach.
Yeah, it's rare to see one that it tackles the issues of our day. And the most striking example is the killing of innocent people. I mean, whether in the womb or out of the womb, what's going on in Canada. They have audacity to call it mercy, but they're killing people. They're actually going into hospital rooms and saying, would you like us to kill you today because we can use it, they can use the room for.
They're also putting the mentally disabled.
They're putting the mentally disabled in that same boat. Phil?
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's true.
Is that in Canada?
Yeah.
Primarily in Canada.
It's in Canada.
Not so much in
No,
America.
it's not happening. Huh?
It's not
They-
just in Canada.
Yeah, and I know.
Right.
It's in Oregon, yeah.
Well, it's in Oregon, but I'm talking about all of Canada.
Certainly European countries.
That should be brought up.
Mm-hmm.
I think the European companies led the way. Canada kind of followed them.
To the people in the church at the time.
It's very much like before abortion was legalized in the United States, it was practiced in various places in Europe and the United States for maybe 4 decades before it got legalized. And so there's something similar going on with euthanasia.
Well, I think it even goes back farther than that, 4 decades before. But the reality is that this law is a standard by which people can live. When it becomes idealized to kill the innocent, then it destroys. It destroys the foundation of society. That's a whole other subject. One of the things is that what we saw with Saint Dominic in his life was the preachers of the Albigensian heresy lived this outward impoverished life. They dressed as poor. They walked around in prayers as if they were poor, but they looked to the people as poor. And this is very attractive to the faithful, because faithful yearn for the poverty, the ideal of poverty. The faithful do. What does this mean? How does this change?
But the difference was it's like a teetotaler versus somebody who gives up alcohol as a penance. So the Albigensians were like teetotalers. They thought all this stuff was evil, and so they're giving up as evil. Whereas a religious, right, he gives up marriage as something good, but for the sake of something better. Whereas the Albigensian gives up marriage because marriage is evil. It's very different.
I know it's very evil. That's why I will not be a teetotaler in this state.
Right. Yeah.
It's a testimony that is not right. Now, this doesn't mean I go.
So, but when I say teetotaler, I mean somebody who thinks drinking wine and beer is wrong.
Right. That's
as
fair.
opposed to somebody who says, "Well,
That's the.
I'm giving it up for Lent, so as to."
I know it's the
Yeah.
same. I meant it the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
As opposed to someone who thinks that wine and beer are good, but you can give them up for the sake of greater good. Just like marriage and family is a very great good, but you can give it up for the sake of even greater good.
the thing is their method of preaching, and
But
the
outside,
effect-
outwardly, it looks the same, right? They're both giving
all
up,
looks the
right?
same. The Waldensians, which were
But their
earlier
motive is
versions-
completely different.
The Waldensians were a somewhat pre-Protestants,
Right.
and they had some of the same. But Albigensians were obviously very.
They're out there.
They were
Way
out
out
floating
there.
around in space somewhere.
Yeah, because
But
the body is evil, right? Like the
they use the
Manichaeans.
same thing.
It's interesting. You look at Padre Pio, right? So he's very austere. He suffers stigmata, fights with the devil all the time, giving up marriage, living the counsels. But he had large families that he loved and would go visit, right? And as friends, right? That he would recoup by going to visit. So he didn't in any way despise the family and all that, right? So that's
Well, I think and you get
and you see it's similar to Saint Dominic.
at the time of Saint Dominic, there were saintly priests or preachers, and effective saintly preachers who lived in poverty and experienced that ideal, but they weren't organized.
Oh yeah.
So
I was just trying to distinguish
I know.
the heretic from the saint, right?
Got
So-
the picture.
part of the effort, obviously, is that they had the mask of the apostolic ideal, but not the heart of an apostolic
Yes.
ideal.
Exactly.
And what St. Dominic was to institute that into the church, to make it something alive that lived inside and outside the church and was observable to people, so that when missionaries went out from the Catholic Church and the order itself, people will say, here is a genuine preacher that lives in accordance with the truth, both in his life and outwardly, in such a way that I can pay attention to him. It was a striking, as Christ said, I come to separate you from one to the other. St. Dominic shows on the sign, and he separates the Waldensians, the Albigensians from one side, and through that wake also effectively brings in an order that changes the nature of the late
Middle Ages.
Middle Ages.
And Francis and Clare are doing something similar.
Who?
Francis and Clare, the Franciscans, are doing something similar in reforming of the church, right, by leading them back to the evangelical.
Now this is a
ideal.
whole nother matter, but they have suffered greatly and are off the road almost in its entirety. It cannot be said about the Dominicans. That's it.
The Franciscans have
Because
multiplied, so you will find
Yeah.
that there are some good Franciscans.
I know, absolutely. Phil?
I attended Mass with one priest whom I always respected as a person who knows his faith. But when he said Mass, there was no love for that Mass.
No reverence.
No love. It was patently obvious that he said it rotely, R-O-T-L-Y, not with a love for the Mass, a love for Jesus. And you could tell it. It doesn't take a highly educated Catholic to pinpoint a priest who knows the Mass but doesn't love it.
Yeah.
Well, we can give the charitable interpretation that it's interior and not visible on the outside. And if you're his friend, you could maybe advise him.
Pamela, is there any comments on that?
There's all sorts.
There's all kinds of doubt.
Lots of
Good, let's.
Let's- And if they want to join,
You want me to go through them?
they want to join orally, please do.
Andrew?
Yeah,
John? Lydia?
Liam's on there too, I think. or
They're the-
Lydia,
they're
John.
the three that's, I don't know, Andrew brought up a bunch of canon laws about preaching.
Oh,
Let's start at the beginning.
Wow. This should be more me.
Canons,
Well,
756.
You want me to
Yeah,
recap it, or do you want to read
summarize,
it?
yeah, please, thank you.
recap it, please.
Okay. So, so the canons, the section where the Code of Canon Law deals with preaching is from 756 to 780, and I sent a link to Pam in the comments where that can be found online. Essentially, what I see from my reading of it is that the church does actually distinguish between various kinds of preaching and does actually use the word preaching to describe them. So she does not restrict the use of the word preaching to only liturgical / juridical preaching. And there are actually various situations in which she recognizes that the bishop could actually call upon members in consecrated life or of the laity to preach under certain circumstances. Just as an example, Canon 766 says, laypersons can be permitted to preach in a church or oratory if certain circumstances require it or it seems advantageous, according to the prescripts of the Conference of Bishops and without prejudice to Canon 767. And then in Canon 70, it says at certain times, according to the prescripts of the diocesan bishop, pastors are to arrange for those types of preaching, which are called spiritual exercises and sacred missions, or for other forms of preaching adapted to the needs of the faithful. So I myself have seen many bishops take advantage of these permissions in order to bring various educated laity and consecrated people to preach parish missions, to give catechetical instruction, and the church recognizes this as a kind of preaching. So in a sense, Max is right in that there's a certain kind of preaching that is solely the apostolic purview of the bishops, but John is also not wrong in recognizing that the bishop can also recognize the special charism of the lay members and as well as the sisters of like the second and third orders of St. Dominic to come in and preach under certain circumstances.
Yes, and those are focused in on official, lack of a better word, liturgical or retreats, that kind of thing. Part of the direction I was going, not only in addition, as you described, Andrew, as to some of the informal functions outside of the altar for the bishop to recognize certain authorities, but also within our own lives and within the order itself, we have a role in the idea of preaching.
Right. So you're talking about, John was citing 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an explanation for the hope, and that you could say that's witnessing as opposed to preaching. But this is why I believe what I believe and why I have the hope I hope. And it is a contribution. You might not want to call it preaching, but it is something that we are called upon to be prepared to do.
I think that it's what is the word? When something, it's like you cannot stop preaching. You can't stop it. And you may want to identify it as something else, but it's like stopping freedom-loving people from doing the things they want to do and love to do, as long as it's lawful and good. No totalitarian has the right to stop it. And definitions, you can restrict definitions, but it doesn't stop the function of preaching that we do amongst each other, in our lives, in our work, in our families. Because how many times, myself included, have sat at a dinner table with children and preached to them. Right. And to people where I might have some limited authority to say something. And I don't even need that authority. So I guess it's the formal, the informal. I think that's what Andrew has touched on and has a distinction. I don't want to get into it any deeper. I don't want to stop.
That's
I'm-
go ahead.
What I'm trying to say is we've talked about this, and I think that it's fair to say that there's various different functions of preaching, and there's certainly the official and the unofficial. The
Canon law said it pretty clearly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
But don't you mean not function, but style? For example, Bishop Barron has a TV program, and I watched that man. And at one point, I told myself, he loves Jesus. You know it. You don't have to be told. You know that he loves, he's an excellent preacher, but he loves Jesus. He's so much in love with Jesus that he could not be stopped at all. And I just thought to myself, I'd like to see that man and other in him, his character.
Yeah, it's quite something.
And some people know so much about the Mass, but it's rote. That's all it is.
Well, he's quite capable.
It's rote.
The thing that with Saint Dominic is that he
loved Jesus.
He loved Jesus, and he knew, and he was well educated, and of course he was given the gift of knowledge as well, and he exercised the virtues. That was some of the point. These are so essential to preaching, to effective preaching, and also prayer, that when you are wanting to talk to someone, when somebody's listening to you, and you are, quote unquote, informally preaching, that you pray that the Holy Spirit be there. As you know, as Michael said earlier, nothing
Yes.
can force this,
Yes.
but we can assist the Holy Spirit by speaking the truth. What does it take? It's essential to
Grant the
our
Holy
function
Spirit.
as members of the third order to study, understand the truth. And the second is to be virtuous, and to be aware of and to work through virtue. And all of us need to do that work. And what that means is that where we work on our sins, we go to confession, we work on making sure that we're truthful with ourselves, and we work on those issues that make a difference, because those take away it removes the devil from our life, and it's his impact, or its impact on our life. Obviously, St. Dominic was gifted, but he also studied. That was key to his work. It notes here that by the end of his early manhood, St. Dominic could be said to possess intellectually all the essentials qualities of the mission. He was, quote, a brilliant scholar possessing the orthodox faith of the church, and he was enkindled with the love of the liturgy and of the priesthood, close quote. So it's an important thing, he loves Christ, he loves the liturgy, he loves the priesthood, but he's a scholar, and he cares deeply about getting to and the study. I'm not just talking about a reading, I'm talking about what is the truth of what's being talked about, and getting to the bottom of that, and understanding that. And we not all of us are called to know things perfectly, but at least we try to. And the Saint Dominic was he was an apostle in the real meaning of that word. And Saint Dominic's life reflects that divine providence was, quote, thus slowly, secretly, but steadily preparing Saint Dominic for the great undertaking and mission of definitely establishing apostolic ideal within the Catholic Church. And it says establishing something that did not exist, at least in the time of his life. In other words, we had priestly friars, we had ones that exercised it, but it was the order itself which was important. It notes here that in 1205, when Bishop Diego and Dominic arrived in Rome and asked the Pope if they could work among the Ecumens, those are the pagans that inhabited the Black Sea area, Innocent III denied the request. They headed back to Spain, but stopped at Castelnau, a small town in Montpellier, not far from Fanjou. Montpellier, I've been there. It's a small little town that has an original church, and it's a small little French church, obviously, in southern France, and that area is deeply wooded area. It's really beautiful. When Dominic met the papal legates working with the heretics in the region, I think a light went on and said, I can use the apostolic ideal, the ideal of poverty and living in that situation to preach. We've already covered this a little bit, but there was the legates, the papal legates. Remember what they were the ones that were sent out directly by the Pope to preach on the Albigensians, and they just resisted. They found no. They probably, some of them probably got run out of town.
So Dominic broke through and the papal legates didn't.
Diego, that's broke the ground where it could. And Bishop Diego, due to his sanctity and his learning, offered them advice suggesting a new way to deal with it. Obviously, St. Dominic was on the same part, and the advice was bold. Diego wanted to be appealed to the people by preaching them not only by words, but also by example. I think we've said this already.
That's chief.
Yeah.
That's chief.
That notes that the evangelical poverty of the preachers, the disputation with the leaders, and exhortation to the people were the key thing to get people to reconcile with the church. And he was confirmed in that way of life. Notes here too, they pronounce it Montpellier in French, it's Montpellier in English. That's that small town I was talking about. And the town of, and I can't fulfill the function of how, but Languedoc is the province. Mm-hmm. And Languedoc, is where we get the term tongue. And it was a different tongue, and it still is in southern France. You would see, like you do in some areas of the States, where you'll see an English sign with Spanish, and like in Canada all over, everything is English and French. But now to this day they have original French, what is known, and then a local dialect. And to give you an example, they spelled, I forget the name, Pruille. They spelled it Pruille, and then the locals spell it Prouhile. And so that when you're driving down the highway, you see the sign Pruille. And so you see that, and there's something different. Anyway, Languedoc, I'm not quite sure origin, something I haven't studied yet. But it definitely has an origin in the distinction of the local language. Anyway, the point here and what the thrust of this is that by their life and living in poverty and their speaking the truth was very attractive to people, to bring people back to the truth. It notes here, St. Dominic learned that learning was critical, but also the good deeds that cooperated with the preacher's doctrine. So, I mean, this is just simple. You live in accordance with your own words. There's no...
Where are you at?
Pardon?
Where are you at?
5E.
You're the basic
15
right where he's at, yeah.
Just a little bit behind. Thank you.
There you are.
It's important to note that
Yeah, there we go.
one of the things, I don't know, you go through life and you hear these sayings over and over again, and you only know them at a surface level. You know, a guy, you have to live in accordance to your words. How many times have we been told, do what, you hear the saying, do what he tells you, but not what he does. The reality is that there's certain things in life that somehow things become very, very real to you. And this became very, very real to St. Dominic and to his preachers, is that we live in accordance with this life in order to make our preaching effective. And that was critical.
Our Lord began to do and to teach, right? So
Yeah.
gave the example first and then explained it.
Bloom's taxonomy.
Somebody's here.
Oh my. Hi, honey.
Hey,
Or,
welcome.
let's do this
Yay,
way.
they found us.
Grab a seat.
Yeah,
If
because
you'd like
some
some coffee,
things,
there's some down there.
you know, they're
That's how he
at a
goes.
superficial level and they reach an application level, and it's always really key to be at that application level, because if you don't reach that application level,
I
your
know
head
this
and your
is
heart are not
Yeah.
coming together, you know. So, but Bloom's taxonomy has a lot of levels for those that are
Yeah.
familiar with it. Yeah. So, but basically, yeah.
In no, it's good. 1215, he was given the charge of an official preacher for the diocese, and his goal was to extirpate heresy, combat bias, teach the faith, and instruct men in good morals. And they were tasked to choose evangelical poverty on behalf of Christ, and by labor, by words, and preaching, and by example. So, I don't know. I think it's particularly true of young men. It's probably true of young women, but they're likely true. But when you see a virtuous man as a young man, it's very attractive. One who is a good, when you speak of virtue, I'm speaking talents or whatever. You mean a good athlete, a person who says, I've heard guys when I was young say, I'll never use the Lord's name. I mean, these are things that are virtues are very attractive, be they physical virtues, moral virtues, or the like. And so it's that word that's so attractive, that if you're attracted to a person because of their way of life and they start speaking, it captures you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
our
And
boys.
that's why we do this. This is the magic. I think this is very human nature.
Our boys and girls, sometimes, especially the boys, would be over at our house. And I told the mother, what are these? Do you hear any of these kids use foul language? Well, now that you mention it, we don't. They know not to do it. I've always tried to treat my wife lovingly, and we sat with a softness, and not slap her around too often. I'm kidding. But, and I told my kids when I taught at Cathedral High School, there are some things that you do not do with a girl or your wife. And that's to maltreat them, slap them, or speak harshly to them, especially speak harshly to them. And there's an American doctor, I forget his name, very popular about 30 or 40 years ago. He betook himself to Vietnam. This was before the war. And he was worked very intently with the Vietnamese. And one day he was walking around one of the places, and he simply stopped. And he looked around. They didn't pay any attention to him. They knew it. They knew it very well. And he looked around again, and he realized he had become one of them. He was taller than they are, but it struck him so sharply.
Dooley? Tom Dooley, is it the name?
I forget the doctor's name. It was 30 or 40 years ago. I had attended anyway. wish, and in our house, neither Sandra nor I use foul or swear words. It's just not done. Why? Because. And the kids, they pick up on that. I don't have to scream at them or say da 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 da, etc. Once in a while, they catch themselves, but rarely.
Something that you had said, John, that reminds me of, I think it was Bishop Barron one just recently said that he was talking to the priests, the men that want to become priests.
Yeah, the seminarians.
Seminarians. It wasn't coming out right.
No, it's okay.
That to be real careful because women really are attractive to that virtue and that that they have to guard for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was and when you were talking, I said that clicked into my mind that virtue is so there for men that want to become priests.
Women especially are sensitive, more souls than men, I think, for certain types of words or speech or certain types of, what do you call it? I don't slap her around. Maybe you, but not her.
That's
Not
right.
lately.
But anyway, and it's our house, they don't swear or anything like that.
You're
Oh,
an
that's good.
example. You know, you're an example for them.
Yeah,
Because kids notice everything we do.
Well,
it's
it's
true.
just that's
That
what
is
this
true.
Yes,
whole thing's about. Is that
Exactly.
we have to give example.
right.
And how do we keep from? The reality is that if virtues keep us from doing something spontaneously. It keeps. What do I mean by that? I mean, if we can fake it through things. I mean, we can fake in the office. We can fake down the road. We can fake with family. But if we really use swear words, it's going to come out at home or in our private lives or whatever.
Right.
But we make the decision to confess and to work our faults through, then we stop doing things that are offensive to God. Just say. There was a comment though, just a minute, Phil, and I'll get you. There's a comment online, then we'll come back to you, Phil.
They're having a discussion online about whether the lay Dominicans have a special charism of preaching.
We do, and it's
So-
the last one.
Yep.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
This one.
yeah. Actually, there is, and we'll study this probably next couple months. But Father Bartolotti put together a paper that explains that the Third Order is the only third order in existence that shares in the charism of preaching of the church and authority.
Wow.
But it's still limited, but it's the only one. We'll study that next month or the following, but it gets into greater detail. But he goes, it's like a 4-page document. I'll talk to Lon about that. The last one, are you talking? The Honors the Third approved the order in 1216, obviously December 22nd. Preachers having selected evangelical preaching as their charism, the ransom of their estates. A year later, the order of preachers was given universal mission. It says the St. Dominic adopted the Augustinian rule. Obviously, I think one of the histories I read, it was because it's the one that they would accept, because Rome was not willing to create a new order with a new rule.
Mhm.
So they went back and they worked through which one they wanted, and it was the Augustinian rule that Dominic came up with. And the
As
Pope
opposed to the
approved it.
Benedictine, because it was more conducive to a life that was active as well as contemplative.
So this, I would, just this alone, and I would argue that this is a really good instruction on for a friar, and I mean that's what this is about. It's applicable to a friar, but it also can be applicable to the third order to the extent that it reasonably applies. In other words, we're not going to live in accordance with all of the evangelical counsels, but we can live in attitude and heart as well as in fact in those areas. Those are important. More importantly than anything for the lay people is to take control of your own life where you can and to try to correct your sins or habits and to live in accordance with virtue. I mean, that to the extent, it's the road of perfection.
Isn't that what they said that we're obligated to read the liturgy, the hours daily, but it's not a sin if we don't.
That's correct. This is, and part of it is, it doesn't, as Father Augustine showed, is that it's not does not result in sin, but it's a fault. That is an imperfection or fault that, so our objective is to live to the best we can in accordance with the rule. We've all lived this, you got children, you got life, things happen.
Well, that's not an imperfection if you have another duty.
No, and having another duty doesn't drag you down to make it a fault. It's just important to remember.
It's a little bit like the Rosary Confraternity. If you don't do it, it's not a sin, but you don't participate in the graces.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thankful they have a lot of audio things because I haven't had very many migraines for about 4 years, and then last week I started getting a little bit of them again, and so I thought, well, it's really good. There's audio stuff because I can turn it down and still, listen to it, and all those apps are there.
That's the good stuff.
And some of them have reminders, which that also is good.
That's good stuff. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah.
For those who want to do more study on this, the actual article is, like I said, it's on the website under formation, under Father Bartolotori's formation program, and it's called Apostolic Ideal of Early Dominicans. Really good article. It's not very long.
And is he the author of it? I couldn't.
No.
Eugene Caccia.
Nope, here it is.
Oh, so this I saw that one, but the one on the thing, was it just somebody typed it out?
I
made
did
an
that.
outline.
I did that.
So it's more of an outline.
That's all it is.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's also in your binders.
It's to assist, in these. It's just one I put together a few years ago, and the whole purpose was.
But it's an outline of that other
Yeah.
work. Okay. Yep. All
That's
right.
what I used to do when I was in college. I'd outline or type outline it. That's how
I learned too.
it was a habit. So this is one of them I did. Okay, any questions or anything online at all?
We'll just continue the discussion about whether the third order has charism and
Yeah,
of preaching.
yeah. Well, we'll
The
cover that.
article is really about the whole Dominican family. It's not really, it doesn't focus on third order particularly. It's the Dominican family. The apostolic ideal is distinct from the hermetic or eremitic ideal of
Right.
older orders, and it's not a purely active group like the Jesuits. It's this apostolic ideal is this marriage of active and contemplative.
Yeah, I think the difference with the Dominicans, because the Canon Regulars already existed, and they're all over the place, particularly near cathedrals and stuff. But is the dedication to preaching abroad, right? So going out and preaching.
Right. The Canon Regular is associated with his cathedral.
Well, let's take a break and then come back here in 5 minutes.
Go.